Hello and welcome back. I'm Joshua Barnes and you're watching NewsX World. Let's first take a look at our top stories. Pope Leo XIV has expressed his condolences for the people who have died after devastating flash flooding in Texas. Search and rescue operations are ongoing, with 51 people already killed and 27 children remaining missing from a youth camp. Mediators have told Hamas that Gaza ceasefire talks will take place in Doha after Israel confirmed it would send a delegation for the discussions. It comes as further deadly Israeli strikes have been reported in the enclave. Hezbollah leader Naim Qassem says the group will not surrender or give up its weapons despite Israeli threats and mounting pressure. In a televised speech, Qassem insisted Israel's aggression must end before any talks of laying down arms. Russia claims to have captured 2 more eastern Ukrainian settlements as the war on the ground continues. Meanwhile, Russia's defense ministry claims to have downed 120 Ukrainian drones overnight. Brazil's President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva hails the BRICS mechanism for advancing global economic development. The leader has started welcoming leaders from the growing BRICS nations ahead of the annual summit, which starts later today. Elon Musk says he's created a new US political party, blasting the increasing deficit as his reason for breaking with Trump. He says America needs fresh thinking and promises to shake up the two-party system. Britain's Foreign Secretary David Lammy has met Syria's leader Ahmed al-Sharaa in Damascus as the UK re-establishes diplomatic ties. The European nation says it will support humanitarian efforts and seek stability amid wider Middle Eastern unrest. Thousands of Tibetan Buddhists have gathered in Dharamshala to mark the Dalai Lama's 90th birthday as he reaffirms his plan to reincarnate. The Tibetan Buddhist leader told followers he hopes to live to 130 and wants his successor found by tradition. Well, we start this hour in the Middle East, and in a significant development, Israeli negotiators are heading to Doha, Qatar today for a new round of indirect talks with Hamas. The goal, reaching a long-awaited truce in Gaza and negotiating the release of hostages still held by the group. According to Israel's public broadcaster, the delegation departed early on Sunday to engage in what is being described as proximity talks. The talks are being facilitated by international mediators, including the United States, and come after Hamas said it was ready to engage immediately and seriously with the latest proposal. That proposal, according to sources close to the discussions, includes a US-backed framework calling for a 60-day truce, with Hamas agreeing to release 10 living hostages and several bodies in exchange for Palestinians held in Israeli prisons. Hamas is also pressing for increased humanitarian aid to Gaza and guarantees of a lasting end to the conflict. Despite some optimism, hurdles do remain though. On the 6th of July, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu called Hamas's requested changes to the Qatari proposal unacceptable. Still, he ordered his team to proceed to Doha to negotiate based on the framework Israel has already approved. As the war in Gaza continues to inflict a heavy toll, hopes rest on this renewed push for diplomacy. Well, joining us to discuss these talks set for Doha, John Rosamondo, president of the Viking Research Associates and a geopolitical analyst who is joining us from Washington, DC. John, as always, thank you ever so much for being here with us. Let's look at the optimism that is there first. Of course, ceasefire talks halted, but Hamas expressing willingness. Israel already saying yes to a US proposal. How optimistic can the geopolitical sphere be about a potential ceasefire upcoming?
Well, I think that it would be for the families of the hostages who are still living, and those whose loved ones have been killed in the attacks, and this will be some, relief for them and closure. However, Hamas has always shown that it will rearm. It will launch rocket attacks against Israel. It's already said they would do another October 7th. So, the ceasefire is just the first stage toward Hamas starting the next war.
Yes, and John, let's look now at the conflicting messaging coming from Israel. Of course, Benjamin Netanyahu saying that amendments Hamas want to make are non-starters and aren't going to be agreed to in a deal. There have been comments from within Israeli politics talking about getting a deal done for these hostages after more than 20 months of warfare following those horrific October 7th attacks. Do you think that this Israeli government is in a position to take a step and concede on any of the key aims that they have in these negotiations that are upcoming?
Well, there's pride on both sides. I think that Israel realizes that any concessions that it takes will be, crowed about by Hamas and its allies as an Israeli defeat. So that's the one thing that's going through the Israeli minds, is they don't want to be seen as being defeated in this war, even though they control 60% of Gaza.
John Rosamondo, you will be staying with us because we're going to stay in Gaza. And in a politically significant moment, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu met with President Isaac Herzog today ahead of his scheduled trip to Washington. Netanyahu is set to meet US President Donald Trump on Monday with key issues on the table, chief among them efforts to secure this ceasefire in Gaza and a possible hostage deal with Hamas. According to a statement from Herzog's office, the president emphasised the urgency of the moment, calling on the Prime Minister to carry with him what he described as an important mission, advancing a deal to bring all our hostages home. President Herzog voiced full support for what he acknowledged could be difficult, complex and painful decisions, adding that he trusts the security establishment and cabinet to rise to the challenge just as they have in the past. Herzog also extended his wishes to the negotiating team currently headed to Doha for indirect talks with Hamas, urging international partners to use their influence to help secure a breakthrough. The president thanked US President Donald Trump for his continued support in addressing Iran's nuclear threat and strengthening Israel's position internationally. Herzog concluded by expressing hope that this Washington visit may also open new regional doors, specifically referencing the Abraham Accords as a framework for deepening Israel's diplomatic ties across the Middle East. Well, John, thank you for staying with us. Let's look at this role of the United States in these ongoing discussions, first relating to the Gaza war between Israel and Hamas. We've heard from the Trump administration consistently since the president assumed office for a second time that support for Israel, but also pushing towards a ceasefire. How pivotal is the US's role in these upcoming negotiations if a ceasefire is to be agreed?
Well, President Trump said from the time he was on the campaign trail that he would end the war in Gaza, which is extremely polarizing and has made Israel look bad on the world stage. And I think that with Steve Witkoff, he's played a very pivotal role in trying to end the fighting in Gaza. And like it or not, the United States is the world's top power, and President Trump is trying to reassert American dominance.
Yes, John, and just very briefly before we do move on, let's talk about that relationship between the US and Israel. How significant is that moving forward, and how might that develop after Benjamin Netanyahu's visit to Washington?
Well, I think that we show that the president showed in the run-up to the war with Iran that he was able to put a ruse saying that there's tension between Washington and Jerusalem, but there isn't any. I think that President Trump will work on Netanyahu to end the fighting and to come to some sort of solution. I mean, some of the things that have been mentioned have been the creation of, say, an Arab League governance over Gaza, with Saudi Arabia and other Arab countries assuming control of the territory. But I think that there's no disagreements between Trump and Netanyahu at this point.
Yes, and John, staying with us once again, we're going to stay in the Gaza enclave, and intensifying violence has reportedly claimed the lives of 33 Palestinians, at least 33 Palestinians, in the past 24 hours, according to local hospital officials. The fatalities come amid a fresh wave of Israeli airstrikes, with the Israeli military reporting over 130 targets struck across the Gaza Strip. In Gaza City, 20 people were reportedly killed and another 25 reportedly wounded when Israeli airstrikes hit 2 residential homes. That's according to the director of Shifa Hospital, Dr. Mohammed Abu Selmia. The area has been under heavy bombardment in recent days, with mounting casualties. Further south, in the coastal area of Mawasi, a zone where thousands of displaced Palestinians live in makeshift tents, 13 more people were killed in what hospital officials say was a direct hit. 5 of the victims were reportedly members of a single family, according to staff at the Nasser Hospital in Khan Yunis. While the Israeli military did not comment on the specific strikes, it confirmed targeting more than 130 so-called terror targets in the past day. These included Hamas command posts, weapons storage facilities and rocket launchers. The military also claims it's eliminated multiple Hamas operatives in northern Gaza. Meanwhile, Israeli hostages are still with Hamas. Protests are taking place all over Israel for their release. John, coming back to you, let's just briefly look at the ongoing action by Israel in Gaza. Do you think that that is helpful, with discussions set to take place? And do you think the US are looking at the continued reported bloodshed in Gaza and questioning whether that is helpful to these peace talks?
Well, I think that there's a consensus, at least in the U.S. military, that these Israeli airstrikes, the Israeli strategy has been a failure. It hasn't, degraded Hamas. Hamas has simply replaced the old fighters with new fighters, and Israel has done nothing in terms of counterinsurgency, and it's done the worst job ever of winning hearts and minds. So I think that the president wants an end to these optics of Israel indiscriminately bombing, whether they're saying it was Hamas targets or not. There's no way that this is succeeding.
John, stay with us, because we're going to stay in the Middle East now. Moving away from Gaza, Hezbollah's leader Naim Qassem has vowed that the group will not surrender or lay down arms despite growing pressure from Israel and the international community. Speaking to thousands of supporters during an Ashura commemoration in Beirut, Qassem said Hezbollah would not give in to threats and insisted that Israel's aggression must end first. His comments come ahead of Monday's visit to Beirut by US envoy Tom Barrack, who is expected to push for Hezbollah's disarmament by the end of the year. Lebanese officials say they have begun dismantling Hezbollah's military infrastructure in the south. John, thank you for staying around as we now move our attention away from Gaza, but stay within the Middle East region. Of course, Hezbollah, a group where there has been fighting with Israel. A ceasefire was agreed, but these comments from Naim Qassem, their leader, saying that they will not back down, they will not surrender their weapons. What do you think comes next after this announcement?
Well, I think that what you're hearing is Iran is telling Hezbollah to dig in and to not give in on the international community's desire to demilitarize Hezbollah. Hezbollah is a malefactor in Lebanon that controls the country. And I think that we're hearing is that they plan to continue their fight with Israel, and there's no end in sight.
Yes, John, staying with us. Meanwhile, the Israeli military says that it has intercepted a missile fired from Yemen towards Israel today, triggering sirens in several areas. Hours later, the spokesperson for Yemen's Houthi movement claimed they had launched a ballistic missile targeting the Jaffa area in central Israel. Let's take a listen to that statement.
نفذت القوة الصاروخية في القوات المسلحة اليمنية عملية عسكرية نوعية استهدفت مطار اللد في منطقة يافا المحتلة، وذلك بصاروخ باليستي فرط صوتي نوع فلسطين 2، وقد حققت العملية هدفها بنجاح بفضل الله، وتسببت في هروب الملايين من قطعان الصهاينة الغاصبين إلى الملاجئ وتوقف حركة عملياتنا الإسنادية مستمرة حتى وقف العدوان على غزة ورفع الحصار عنها، وإنا بعون الله مستعدون وجاهزون للتعامل مع أي تطورات قد تحدث خلال الأيام المقبلة.
Well, the Houthis, backed by Iran, have been attacking Israel since October in what they call is solidarity with Palestinians in Gaza. Israel has warned of a possible naval and air blockade if the Houthi attacks continue. Most of the missiles and drones fired by the Houthis have been intercepted by Israeli missile defence systems. John, thank you for staying with us. Let's look at this situation here. You mentioned one proxy group earlier. We spoke about Hezbollah. Yemen, is this in solidarity with Gaza, or do you think that this is a move off the back of what happened between Israel and Iran?
Well, the Houthis are manipulated and controlled by the Islamic Republic Guard Quds Force. So this is all continuation of everything that Iran is up to. When they talk about solidarity, like that's just propaganda terms. It's just another part of Iran's effort to get at Israel. The missiles that it fires are Iranian supplied missiles. It's Iranian hardware, Iranian spy ships, all together with the Houthis against Israel.
Yes, John, stay with us. We're going to stay in the region talking about Iran. 2 members of Iran's Revolutionary Guards have been killed while defusing explosives in Khorramabad, a region struck by Israel last month. Iranian media say the devices were left behind after recent Israeli strikes. The incident comes just weeks after a deadly 12-day war between Israel and Iran that left over 900 dead in Iran, according to Tehran's judiciary. Israel said its strikes targeted Iran's nuclear threat, a claim Iran denies. A ceasefire took effect on June the 24th. Since then, Iran has reopened its airspace, closed since the war's first day. Meanwhile, Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei was seen in public for the first time since the conflict, attending a religious ceremony in Tehran on Sunday. John, coming back to you as we wrap up our discussion on the latest Middle Eastern news, this situation of two Iranians being killed by a device, of course, coming, as we've just said, after the first public appearance of Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. How do you think Iran's standing on the global stage has been affected by these strikes by Israel? And how do you think the Iranian regime could look to respond in the face of concerns surrounding their nuclear program with global calls from world leaders about that issue?
Well, I think the fact that the Islamic Republic is still standing speaks volumes. I think that the Israelis had hoped to trigger an uprising against the regime, but the regime seems to be very resilient and has been executing Iranians in large numbers, saying that they're Mossad agents. I think that they could end up doing is, inflaming their proxies, like as our rule of the Houthis in Yemen, or increasing support for Hezbollah to keep the pressure up on Israel. So I think that this, from a propaganda standpoint, the Iranians are looking good.
John Rosamondo, I would like to thank you for joining us for this section of the programme to go through all of that news from the Middle East here on NewsX World. We will continue to bring you all of those updates on the ongoing conflicts and tensions as we get them. But we move on now, and Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva has emphasised the key role of BRICS in global economic development during the BRICS Business Forum 2025 in Rio de Janeiro. He highlighted that BRICS nations contribute 40% of global GDP, with their growth rates hitting 4% in 2024, well above the global average of 3.3%. Lula stressed the importance of emerging economies working together to combat rising protectionism and defend the multilateralist trading system. He also praised the new development bank, also known as NDB, which supports sustainable infrastructure and development projects in BRICS nations and other emerging economies. As the rotating chair, Brazil is hosting the 17th BRICS summit, focusing on strengthening cooperation within the global south. The summit addresses key issues such as food security, energy transition, digital economy, and sustainable development. Lula's leadership aims to promote a more inclusive and sustainable global governance system for all nations. Well, joining us to discuss this development and the summit, Dr. Noor Nawandi, a security analyst and PISOPS expert, joining us from Malaysia. Dr. Nawandi, thank you ever so much for taking the time. Let's look at this BRICS summit and the significance of it amid the global uncertainty around tariffs, trade, but also ongoing conflicts. Where is BRICS standing in terms of blocks within the global scale?
I think what the BRICS needs to do now, or what the BRICS is heading, is to look into the rising global protectionisms, where the emerging economies have to be, in sorts of way, I think BRICS are defending themselves and looking into to defend the multilateral trade system, because when we talk about the issues of the reform Western-dominated financial institution, so I think BRICS feel that they have to play some significant role in looking into how the new development banks and all of the mechanisms that we informed by the BRICS future strategy in looking into on how to cushion up the effects on the infrastructure, social developments, and of course the sustainable growth across the regions for developing markets when it talks about looking into accelerating the global development. And this is what I said, one of the main elements for the BRICS to look into that, because the multilateralisms and the South-South solidarity is important to be headed by the BRICS, and BRICS thinks that they can offer some alternative forum to defend the trade openness. We are talking about some tariff war that happening in the Europe and all over the world based on the US tariff hike. That of course the war between, particularly between the tariff war between the China and the US. And this is what we call the institutional reform of the global finance and governance have to be redesigned. And I think BRICS are considering to look into that to become part of the strategic mechanism. And whether we works or not, we have to look into what will be the future significant element that BRICS will be going to do. But I think it's a scale of building up institution, building of financial institution, and looking into whether there be some shifting of the global order. I think this is what we call the challenges of the BRICS, and of course the challenging of the Western dominance in global governance, particularly the trade development and finance developments, of course the economic structure as a whole.
Yes, Dr. Nawandi, if you stay with us, I'm glad you brought up tariffs, because we're going to move to tensions now that are rising ahead of a crucial deadline as the European Union, America's largest trading partner, awaits word on whether President Trump will impose harsh tariffs on European goods. The president already slapped a 20% import tax on EU products back in April, but paused the move until July the 9th to allow for talks. That deadline now looms. Trump has threatened to raise tariffs even further, up to 50% if negotiations fail. Such a hike would make European products like French cheese, German electronics and Spanish medicines much more expensive for American consumers. The EU says it still wants a deal, but is ready to retaliate, promising tariffs on US exports ranging from beef and auto parts to beer and Boeing planes. Well, Dr. Nawandi, thank you for staying with us. Of course, we know that this tariff deadline is upcoming. We know that discussions have been had, but clearly still work needing to be done with many nations in the US, but specifically here, the EU. It is the US's biggest trading partner. Firstly, do you think Trump will actually stick to his word? Because we know there will be an economic impact if tariffs are up to 50% on certain goods coming from the EU. And how quickly do you think a deal could get done given the current impasse at play?
I think Trump is basically heading to look into the tariff element, to hike the tariff. But how significant it will be, or there will be some negotiation, I think this is another subject matter to be discussed. But as long as the trend is showing, Trump is basically not going to step back in his decision of hiking the tariff. And of course, July 9 deadline is significant in looking whether there are be some high-level framework elements to be materialized and some elements that might be looking into on how to reduce the severe economic penalties that might be receiving by the EU if this tariff war goes ahead. And I do believe that now also looking into the EU is preparing the counter tariff. Euro also basically looking into the targeting the US export in all the sector, the manufacturing, cosmetic machinery, aviations, and other part of that, and to look into some remedies need to be done if the deployments of, if the significant elements of discussion collapse by the talks to reduce or to have some form of formidable better solutions according to the tariff. And of course, the intensifying talks that we have now within the US trades, within the EU parts, and before July, I think there will be a form of significant to look into that. And there will be some legal and political dimension involved. There will be some form of injunctions will be held in the context by the EU or the US to hold the tariff or to make sure that it does not exceed the presidential power of the Trump to look into how it could look into form of that. So nevertheless, I think across the US and EU trades, there will be some lots of GDPs losing out. There will be lots of capital losing out, particularly for both countries, particularly on the EU's countries like Israel, countries like Italy, for example, alone might be risking of losing billions of dollars of tariff due to the lack of elements if this deal fall out. I think this is something that gives a strong considerations of EU. EU basically are looking to what are the responses and delegating the frameworks of discussion to make sure that the negotiation works well and to maintain the 10% baseline tariff, but to prevent the full 50% and more increase, basically modeled by the US-UK agreement, is something that will become a worrying part of EU. And some US leaders are very split on these decisions. Germany basically are pushing back to quick deal to avoid any form of economic fallouts. France looking into much more favor and stronger, more equitable agreements. And all the EU countries basically are moving by individual, by unilateral and bilateral discussing directly with Europe, with US and EU is moving into the multilateral pacts to have some negotiation to make sure that these negotiations and framework deal will be around the baseline of 10% tariff.
Yes, and Dr. Nawandi, we of course talk about tariffs all the time since Trump's Liberation Day in early April. But can you provide some context, please, on what the actual impact will be for individuals that are living in the United States, but also those that are living in the EU and other countries that may not have a deal agreed and see these tariffs jump up from the 10% baseline to potentially up to 50 or 70% in some nations' cases?
I think one of the biggest economic concern is basically the US or the EU's economic facing a pricing of consumer price hikes. So as long as we or the EU people, around the world impacted by the tariff war between China, US and EU and US, there will be a form of hiking of consumer prices might be around 20, 25 more, that around 30 to 50%, subjected to some currency shift. And this also will affect the denominatings of the US dollar against other currencies, yuans, BRICS and countries and other form of currencies. And this also look into the whole of the EU and US trade channel of environments of economics. There be some, like I mentioned earlier, GDP loss and consumer price hike. But the one that matters most, of course, the potentiality of the jobs losing, employment rates across the regions of EU, when the tariff will hike the price and will burdens the elements of the cost and eventually will make the economics to be collapse. And the other significant element, we're going to see lots of injunctions, lots of tariff war being put by the legal representations on how to block tariff elements and what will be the next elements. There might be a consortiums of legal frameworks across the region to discuss on this, but basically the one that's going to lose more is basically the country's GDP and the job employments, the financial risk, and might be some elements that might be not subjected to real significant impact that be a form of inflation rate across the EU and some certain countries affected by this global tariff policy war.
Yes, Dr. Nawandi, if you stay with us, we are going to move on now. And a humanitarian crisis is unfolding along Afghanistan's west border as tens of thousands of Afghans are returning from Iran ahead of a 6th of July deadline that requires undocumented migrants to leave the country. The order issued by Tehran in late May affects up to 4 million Afghans, part of the 6 million Iran says are living within its borders. Since mid-June, border crossings have surged, with a record 43,000 people crossing into Afghanistan at Islam Kala on July the 1st alone, according to the UN Refugee Agency. More than 250,000 Afghans returned from Iran in the month of June, many of them entire families. Let's listen in to some of the refugees who have been returning home from the border.
کشور ایران به کل اطراف خارجی برادرای افغانستان ما میکنه حتی کشورهای دیگه نمیکنه درسته میگه ما همسایه افغانستانو ما جمهوری اسلامی اصلا او اسلام نیه اگر اسلام بدیم مسلمانی بدیم ولی این رفتار به مسلمان نمیکنه
ما دیگه تا زنده باشیم ایران نشان برمیگردیم تا زمانی که همین تامین امنیت باشه همین قانون باشه همین نظم باشه ما نوکر وطن به وطن خود ما خاک وطن خود سجده میکنیم هر که به وطن خود بیای خورشیم با خدا وطن ما گدایی کنیم وطن.
Well, UNICEF warns this has become an emergency in a nation already struggling with mass displacement. Nearly 1.4 million Afghans have returned from Iran and Pakistan this year, and a quarter of them are children. This is what the UNICEF representative to Afghanistan had to say.
What we see lately is that massive returnees coming in from Iran, both in Islam Kala, but also in Nimroz. And really, this is a huge number that we've not had before. This week, when I was there over the last few days, we begin to see on the average more than 20,000 returnees every day. Even we had a peak that was close to 30,000 on the 20th. What is concerning is that 25% of all these returns are children, meaning children that are vulnerable, meaning children that need care and support because the demographics have shifted. You are seeing families coming in one block. But beyond that, and in the middle of all of these, are children who are unaccompanied and who are separated, meaning their vulnerability is even more higher than any other child.
Well, Dr. Nawandi, thank you ever so much for staying with us. What's the significance of potentially 4 million people returning back to Afghanistan, having to leave Iran, and what potentially could be the outcome for those families with young children who may have nowhere to go on such a vast scale?
I think, in the first contact, I think it's the right of Iran to ask for the returns of the refugee or particularly the elements of the Afghan people back to the country. But of course, this will trigger a very muchly, quite a significant elements in terms of humanitarian issues because it will look into the displacements of some people and more than, I think, 4 million of Afghan returning backs in a pack of the bigger form of representations of the people, will trigger a form of recent search of people. And this will actually destabilize a form of Afghans as well. If the current destabilizations of Afghanistan in terms of humanitarian package, particularly providing food, shelter, houses, education, and all the basic necessities for those returning from Iran. And the country of Afghanistan is still picking up. They are basically grappling with a form of poverty. They are basically have some elements of unemployment and some shrinking external support from all the nations around the world. And this, of course, will bring much more difficulties in the socio-economic values of the Afghanistan. And I think this is the biggest concern on United Nations, actually United Nations, HCR, and United Nations other form of representations, the humanitarian aids, and of course the Office Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, to look into this matter seriously on how to have a stimulus package of humanitarian assistance to cushion the effect of these forced elements of return back of Afghan people from Iran.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Nawani. We're going to move away now from Iran and Afghanistan and head over to Europe. A UK-funded report documenting what it calls widespread and systematic sexual violence committed during the October 7th Hamas attack is set to be released on the 8th of July in Jerusalem. Known as the Diner Report, the publication is the work of Israeli gender and legal experts and was partially funded by the British government. It is intended to confront what the authors describe as a global silence and denial surrounding the sexual violence committed during the attack. According to local media, the report compiles harrowing testimonies from 15 former hostages, a survivor of an attempted rape at the Supernova Music Festival, and 17 eyewitnesses or secondary witnesses. The document assaults span 6 different locations inside Israel. The authors say the report is not only a documentation of crimes, but a call to set the historical record straight. It asserts that Hamas used sexual violence intentionally as a weapon in their assault. The findings are expected to intensify international scrutiny. Moving over to North America now, Pope Leo XIV has offered his condolences to families affected by the deadly floods in Texas that have claimed at least 50 lives and left nearly 30 people missing, many of them children. Following Sunday's Angelus prayers, the US-born pontiff spoke of the young girls who vanished during flash floods at a summer camp along the Guadalupe River. He said, "We pray for them," and expressed deep sympathy to grieving families. Let's have a listen to what Pope Leo XIV has said.
I would like to express sincere condolences to all the families who have lost loved ones, in particular their daughters who were at summer camp in the disaster caused by the flooding of the Guadalupe River in Texas in the United States. We pray for them.
Meanwhile, the rescuers have been searching non-stop for 27 missing girls and teenagers. The floods hit suddenly on Friday when torrential rain caused the Guadalupe River to rise 8 metres in just 45 minutes. Officials say nearly 300 millimetres of rain fell in an hour, a third of the region's annual total. Now, let us take a look at some stories from the world of sports. Former Chicago White Sox pitcher Bobby Jenks has died at the age of 44 after battling a rare form of stomach cancer. Jenks was a 2-time All-Star and a key part of the White Sox team that won the 2005 World Series, ending an 88-year title drought. He threw the final pitch in Game 4 to seal the victory over the Houston Astros. After 6 seasons in Chicago, Jenks joined the Boston Red Sox but retired in 2011 due to spine issues. He had been living in Portugal while undergoing treatment for adenocarcinoma, a rare stomach cancer. Rain has delayed the start of play on day 5 of the India-England test at Edgbaston, with light showers expected until noon. Conditions have improved though, and play has started, with India taking 2 early wickets in that contest. England need an unlikely 536 runs to win. The rain, of course, not helping them, though a minimum of 80 overs are going to be played out if there is no further rain today. Arsenal have completed the signing of Spanish midfielder Martin Zubimendi from Real Sociedad in a deal worth £60 million. The 26-year-old, who won Euro 2024 with Spain, rejected Liverpool last summer and signed a 5-year deal with the Gunners. Zubimendi, a deep-lying playmaker, was an obsession for manager Mikel Arteta, who had pushed hard for the transfer over the previous year. He becomes Arsenal's second signing of the summer after goalkeeper Kepa joined from Chelsea. The Gunners paid above his release clause to spread the costs, avoiding Spanish rules that require one-time payments. Athletes from Kenya have dominated the Diamond League meet in Eugene with 2 world records shattered on a night of athletic fireworks. Beatrice Chebet set a new women's 5,000 metres world record with a time of just over 13 minutes and 58 seconds, smashing Gudaft Sege's previous mark by over 2 seconds. Her compatriot Faith Kipyegon broke her own 1,500 metre world record in the final race of the evening. Jamaican sprinter Kashani Thomas won the men's 100 metres in a time of 9.85 seconds, while Mondo Duplantis fell short of another pole vault world record. And Sydney McLaughlin-Levrone took the women's 400 metre flat race in a tight finish. India's Srikanth Kidambi came heartbreakingly close to reaching the Canada Open, but fell short in a gritty semi-final clash against Japan's Kento Nishimoto. Despite winning the first game, Srikanth lost 21-19, 14-21, 18-21 in a 78-minute thriller. It was a golden opportunity, especially after top seed Kodal Naroko exited, but Nishimoto proved too steady in key moments. Srikanth's wait for a BWF World Tour title continues. Well, that's all we have time for, but we will continue to bring you more of the latest news updates from across the world.